Great.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Gambling Did You Know session. So today we have a pretty important topic. We are covering the effects of gambling on mental health. Mental health is something that society as a whole is starting to talk and think about more and more. And it's important to, bring this topic and relate it to gambling because we know that gambling can have real effects on people's mental health. And that is very important to consider. So starting off, I want to just kind of cover what mental health means, what that is a little bit before we jump in here. So first off, mental health basically includes our emotional, psychological, and social well-being. When you think about physical health, you might think about things like exercise and eating healthy, maybe what a person kind of looks like on the outside. Mental health is a little bit harder to think about, a little bit harder to, deal with a little bit. So this is kind of more on the inside. It's how we relate to people. It's going to affect how we think, how we feel, and how we act. So that's kind of a good way to put it that, if you're not sure what mental health is, just think about those three things. So, it's affecting how I think, how I feel, my feelings about things, and then how I actually react and how I act in different situations. If you think about it, this is going to help determine how we handle things like stress, how we can relate to others, and how we can make decisions for ourselves and for our futures. So mental health is basically crucial. It's important at any age a person's at, from just being a young child through adulthood. So again, this is something that is being talked about more. It's being thought about more nowadays than in the past, which is a really good sign. So when we start to think about gambling and mental health, I think the first question that would come to mind is gambling all bad for mental health? So is this only going to have negative effects for our mental health? This is a bit of a tricky question. I would say it's not necessarily always going to be bad for a person's mental health. So this definitely depends. Now, the majority of people who do gamble actually can do so in a way that is not harmful to themselves. It's not harmful to others. So it's not necessarily a bad thing for their mental health. These people, we would consider, if we're trying to kind of group these people together, we would consider them to be recreational gamblers. And you might have heard me talk about this term before, but a recreational gambler will talk about some of those signs and symptoms. If you know someone who gambles and you think that they might be a recreational gambler, this is kind of, I guess, the best version of a gambler that we could see. Someone who is gambling, they choose to gamble, but they do it in kind of a safe way. So let's look at some of those examples of what makes a person who does gamble a recreational gambler. First off, they're going to not be gambling all the time. So they gamble every once in a while. They tend to use small amounts of money, or this is really a key point here, money that they can afford to lose. That amount of money depends for everybody. We're all going to have a different kind of level of that money that we can afford to lose. But a recreational gambler is never going to bet something that if they were to lose that money, it's going to cause them a lot of stress. It's going to be very dangerous for them. They also gamble for, one specific reason, and it's for entertainment or, for fun. They're gambling to socialize with friends and things like that. They're definitely not gambling just for the serious expectation of winning money. It's okay to think like, oh, that'd be awesome if I won a bunch of money, but that's not why you're going to gamble. That's not the real reason for your gambling in the first place. They also understand that when you're betting against the house, a casino, sports book, anything like that, it's impossible to make a profit in the long run. So again, that's why you're gambling with only money you can afford to lose, because if I do lose this money, that's okay. I'm going to be fine. A recreational gambler is also not going to hide their gambling. They're going to be open with people. There's no reason for them to hide it because it's not a problem for them. They're also not preoccupied or really focused on gambling. It's just one aspect of their free time. They, engage in other behaviors. to let off steam and things like that. So this is something that's just one avenue that they can use to relax, have a little bit of fun sometimes. And if they, for whatever reason, can't gamble for an extended period of time, they're okay with that. They have no problem stopping, when they should or when they have to for a specific reason. And lastly, they don't have any gambling misconceptions or fallacies, things that we've talked about in the past. So again, if you are seeing, some of these signs in a person that you care about who does gamble, that's a good sign. If they are gambling, we want them to be, considering each of these things, keeping these things in mind. So what happens if you kind of cross that line a little bit? What happens if maybe a person is starting to gamble a little bit too much? They're becoming preoccupied with gambling, or they're placing really big bets, things they can't really afford to lose, things like that. If this happens, a person might start to develop problem gambling or gambling disorder. So this is actually a diagnosable disorder that a person can have. This is an addictive behavior. It can be dangerous. So I do want to stress that gambling does not only lead to financial struggles. That's something that a lot of people think, but gambling can affect many parts of our lives, our mental health as well. That's why we're talking about it today. So it can affect a person's health and well-being, and really make it so that they're stressed, they're feeling anxiety, things like that, that we'll talk about a little bit later. Some of those signs, again, of problem gambling or gambling disorder, I'm not going to go through every one of these. It's just kind of the opposite of what we just talked about with recreational gambling. But I do want to kind of pose a couple questions here for you. So you can either ask yourself this if you are the person who maybe is crossing the line there a little bit with problem gambling, or you can kind of pose these questions to someone who you might be a little bit worried about there. So the first question is, why do I gamble, or why do you gamble in the first place? Is it so that you can just have some fun with friends, or is it that you are trying to win a bunch of money, or you're trying to maybe make up for money that you've lost in the past? So that would be kind of a red flag there for problem gambling. The next question is, do I plan my schedule around gambling? So again, are you really focused on gambling, or is this just one thing that you do every once in a while that doesn't, really affect your life for the most part? And then the final question is, what happens when I can't gamble? So, if I am, spending time with family or something like that, and I really wanted to go to the casino today, but I'm not able to, is that going to be a real problem for me, or is it okay? So those three questions can kind of point you in the right direction, as well as these other examples on the screen here. All right, so I do have another little test for everyone who is watching this. So what I want you to do, there's a bunch of pictures here on the screen of different people. I want you to determine the person who is struggling with their gambling, someone who is dealing with problem gambling or gambling disorder. All right, hopefully you have that person chosen, or multiple people may be chosen on here. But I'm going to tell you right now, you can't really do this. So this is kind of, I guess, a trick question. None of these people are, as far as we know, dealing with problem gambling or gambling disorder. These are just a couple kind of stock images that I found on the internet. So these people, you can't tell just by the outward appearance of a person if they are struggling with something like this. So that's the whole idea of mental health in general, is that it's sometimes different from physical health because it's harder to hide, or it's easier to hide things when it comes to mental health. So if a person is dealing with problem gambling or gambling disorder, sure, maybe they will be kind of looking a little bit sad, or feeling defeated and things like that. But also throughout their day, they might look happy. They might be smiling. They might be having fun with friends and things like that. It's just maybe when they're home and alone, they're able to kind of show those things a little bit more. So that is kind of just to say that it is easy for a person to hide these problems. That doesn't mean that these problems aren't real. So how can gambling actually affect your health? we've covered this a little bit so far today, but I do want to go a little bit more in depth here. So I've mentioned this, but gambling is an addictive behavior. What does that actually mean? This means that, again, there is a diagnosable problem that we're talking about, gambling disorder. And basically that means that our brain is being affected. Gambling can actually change how the brain works in a similar way to substance misuse. This can make a person actually crave gambling. It can also make them feel like they can't go without gambling. And then that's just going to, again, set up a whole host of other problems. So too much gambling can lead to things like increased stress, anxiety, and depression. So it may not actually cause, anxiety and depression and those sorts of disorders, but it can also kind of increase them, exacerbate them, make them harder to deal with for a person. And gambling can also start to affect our relationships and the people we care about. So if you go back to thinking about what mental health is, it's, how we feel, how we think, and how we act. But it also kind of deals with our relationships with people. So you can see that these different effects that gambling can have if a person is struggling with gambling, this really, really closely ties into our mental health. Just a couple other facts to keep in mind that, affect our mental health as well. Unfortunately, roughly 1 in 5 pathological gamblers, or again, this is kind of a similar example as gambling disorder. Roughly 1 in 5 of these people go on to attempt suicide. And this actually means that gambling has the highest rate of all addictive behaviors. And, that's a really unfortunate fact and something that, suicide and mental health are very closely related as well, as we know. Again, gambling, like other addictive behaviors, is stigmatized as well. So that makes it harder for people to deal with it too. There's different types of stigma here as well. So public stigma, this is basically where, people, society as a whole kind of looks down on those who are struggling with things like gambling, things with like substance use disorders as well. We have self-stigma too, though. So this is, over time, when you're hearing and seeing people look down on you for something that you feel like you can't control and that you really can't control, you're going to start to internalize that a little bit. So we find that people who do struggle with gambling also tend to kind of become ashamed of themselves. They feel like it's their fault. They feel like they're a failure or something like that. And that's really not the case. It's just how dangerous gambling can be for our brains and for our mental health. And finally, we do see structural stigma as well. So this is basically that, we haven't prioritized as a society things like prevention and treatment as much as we should have been in the past. We're kind of on the rise of that. We're talking about gambling prevention today, and we talk about gambling treatment often, but this is something that, over time has started to happen. So since there hasn't been enough of that for many years, people have been kind of developing those gambling issues and not having somewhere to turn. So these are definitely things that I want to keep in mind as we start to wrap up a little bit today. Before we get to that wrap up point, I do want to talk about what we can actually do about this. So today has been just kind of focusing on the problems of gambling and mental health, but how do we actually start to protect our mental health and avoid those gambling problems? So if you are, I'm kind of breaking this down, if you do choose to gamble and if you do not choose to gamble. So if you are choosing to gamble, hopefully you're of age to do that, but you definitely want to be setting time and money limits. That's essential to this. You don't want to exceed that budget. Once you have that money limit set, don't go over that for any reason. It's okay if you kind of lost that money that you had just lost. You don't want to, spend more money to try to make that up. That's where you start to get into problems there. Never borrow money from people to gamble. Again, if you don't have the money for it, don't do it. Know the risks. So this is, great that you're seeing this video, that you're paying attention here. You're learning some of these risks as we talk about them. Again, just choose to play for choose to play for fun, not money. So, think about gambling as similar to going to see a movie, right? You pay for the movie, you know that you're not going to get your money back there, but it's an enjoyable thing for you. So kind of setting that same mindset for gambling is the best way to handle this. And you definitely want to be balancing gambling with healthy activities, other healthy activities, right? So making sure that, gambling isn't your only social activity or only fun activity. You have other ways to actually have fun there. Now, if you choose not to gamble, I'm trying to talk about things that you can do instead that would help you just throughout your life and dealing with your mental health too. So engaging in physical activity, this is one that's really beneficial for your physical health and your mental health as well. You can also consider meditation. This is something that, again, is on the rise. A lot of people still don't know too much about it. But again, it can help clear our minds. It can help us, just manage our stress better. And then that can, again, have effects across both mental and physical health too. Spending time with family and friends, especially those who don't gamble, that is something that can kind of make you forget about gambling, but also kind of helping build those strong relationships there. Volunteering and traveling, and then exploring new hobbies. So really, this is pretty broad at this point, but just finding something else instead of gambling that's still a healthy behavior that can help you, again, build and protect your mental health. That's what we're really talking about here. All right, so lastly, I do want to mention some avenues of support if you are struggling with gambling. So help is definitely available. We do have some different examples on the screen here. So Gamblers Anonymous, this is for someone who actually is dealing with those gambling problems. It's a kind of support group that you can go to and actually, talk to other people who are going through similar things as you. That can be really, really beneficial for many people. Gamma Nod, this is for actually friends and family of those who kind of are dealing with those gambling problems. So, if you know someone who is dealing with these problems and it's starting to affect you too, you can also go to a support group. You can look up Gamma Nod and find the closest one to you. The disassociated persons list, this is actually something that's voluntary. If a person knows that they're struggling with gambling, they feel like they can't control it, they can actually sign up on this list, and then they will be kind of they won't be able to enter and go into casinos and things like that. So they're going to actually kind of bar you from those places, but it's a voluntary thing. So you have to take that step, and then they will kind of help you along with that journey. And lastly, the Michigan Problem Gambling Helpline is 1-800-270-7117. So definitely check out any of these resources if they apply to you. But lastly, I do have some additional resources that I normally share with you too. These are things that you can reach out to as well. So I'll leave this up for a couple seconds more, but thank you everybody for tuning in today, and we'll see you next time with another Gambling Did You Know session.